much, Raul and Adele. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rondella Richardson. I'm from the North, here from Boston. I'm the morning anchor at WCVB TV, which is the ABC News affiliate in the greater Boston market. And I am the class of 1990 and a very proud Northeastern University alumni. Glad to be with you here today for a pretty special session. Okay, if you're interested in learning more about U.S. Latin American relations and the vital security partnerships that we have in the region, you are in the right place, because there is no one closer to the source or the context than U.S. Southern Command. And I know us Northerners, you may not think about the Southern Command, but it helps us all sleep better at night, I can tell you that from what I've learned. You are absolutely in the right place. There are few sources closer to this than the gentleman I'm introducing you to today. First of all, the U.S. Southern Command, it's responsible for the cooperation and the operation of the security in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. And we are honored here today to have Michael T. Plain joining us. Tell you a little bit about the retired Lieutenant General with the U.S. Air Force, who served as the former military deputy commander of U.S. Southern Command. He is a 3-star general, former president of the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., with more than 37 plus years in the U.S. military, with operations that included Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Get this, he has more than 2,000 flight hours and 375 combat flying hours. So you know he has some stories, right? He is also highly decorated. He has an award from the Defense Superior Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star Medal, among many others that we do not have time to list here because we want to hear all of his stories. It is my pleasure to introduce you today to Lieutenant General Michael T. Plain with the U.S. Air Force. Please join me, sir.
Please. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How's everyone doing? I saw a bunch of folks getting up right before the session started, so I'm hoping they're using the facilities, and that's not a commentary on this session, but you all look very alert and very ready for our discussion. Ms. Richardson, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. My mother must have called you beforehand, and I probably owe her and you dinner. Well, 2 of my absolute favorite subjects that we're discussing at this summit, and particularly in this session, are leadership and Latin America. Leadership matters, and it matters most in times of crisis. But what you do outside of times of crisis sets the stage for how well you can perform in crisis. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is leadership can be learned. That's a good thing, because that's kind of why we're here. Mm-hmm. If it can't be learned, why do we do these kinds of things? Why do we have schools? Why do we have laboratory and leadership exercises? But what I would tell you is, in addition to learning on leadership, you have to practice as well, right? So seek out opportunities to exercise your own leadership. And guess what? You're going to fail. There is no leader who gets it right every single time. And what you do when you fail matters as well. I would submit to you that we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. And I know Rondella has a few questions lined up for me here, and I'll take that particular one when it comes along, because I've had a number of failures in my life, in my career, and I'm happy to recount some of those with you, and we can have a discussion about how we all move forward from those kinds of things. But moving on from that into the corollary topic of discussion in Latin America. So I spent almost 5 years in 2 different assignments at U.S. Southern Command here in Doral. And at U.S. Southern Command, we oversaw all U.S. military activity across much of the Caribbean and Latin America, as Ms. Richardson noted. And that included security assistance, working with our partners in the region. That included humanitarian assistance and disaster response. And I'll touch a little bit on some of the hurricane relief operations I've participated in the COVID relief that played such a big part in 20 and 21 throughout the region as well. But the really important part is you have to get to know your partners. You have to get to know your neighbors. And if you don't do that, you're not going to succeed. And I think that's a good lesson in leadership in general, is you have to know the people you're working with, your colleagues, who you're working for, who's working for you. Figure out what motivates them and try to present that to them. Present them opportunities to succeed. Because what I learned after more than 3 decades in the military is that the vast majority of people come to work every single day wanting to do a good job. And they want to be recognized for doing a good job. And as part of the wrap-up of this introductory session, before we get into our fireside chat here, I would offer a quote from President Teddy Roosevelt. Most people are familiar with his Man in the Arena speech. I'm not going to quote from that. One of my favorite quotes from President Roosevelt says that far and away, one of life's best pleasures is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. So what's your worthy work? What are you going to invest your time, your talent, your energy, your passion into that makes our world a better and safer place? So with that, Ms. Richardson, I look forward to our conversation.
You have had... I think he's inspired all of us to do our best and become the top of the game leaders. You've had interactions with so many global leaders. You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but I would love to hear some of the narratives, some of the sayings. Tell me about some of the people that you would consider exemplary leaders and some of the leadership lessons that you've gleaned from them that maybe we can move on to.
Thank you. So my bosses typically had the most interaction with the most senior leaders. Has anyone ever been a number 2 in an organization, which is what a deputy commander is? What's the job of the number 2? To do whatever the boss either doesn't want you to do or wants you to do. So oftentimes the commander would meet with the president or the prime minister of a particular country or the chief of defense. But in Latin America and the Caribbean, I had a chance to do that in limited ways as well. And I think a really important theme for this conference, especially focused on security, is something I heard from the Prime Minister of Jamaica 5 years ago. So they were commissioning an intelligence and surveillance aircraft and a rescue helicopter, 2 airplanes. The Prime Minister of the country shows up for this event with the Jamaica Defense Force. And in the course of his remarks, he said a phrase that has stayed with me ever since. And he said, without security, there can be no prosperity. So they were investing their own national funds in these aircraft to help bolster the security in and around Jamaica and in the region. So as you think about the intersection of industry and business with defense and security, they are interrelated. And the converse is true as well, or the reverse is true as well. That without prosperity, you can't have security because you don't have the ability to invest in the types of things you need to bolster that security. So certainly Prime Minister Holness from Jamaica is one of those examples. When I was at the National Defense University just a couple of years ago, we had 3 different heads of state come speak to our student body. We had the president of Guyana, which they are on the cusp of an economic breakthrough, and they have really focused hard on how they're going to use that prosperity to generate their own security now and into the future. We had the president of Mozambique come speak to us. And then we had the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, come speak to our student body. And what he detailed about this unprovoked war of aggression that Russia started against Ukraine now, yesterday, 3 years ago, earlier this week, 3 years ago. So this war is now entering its 4th year. how this gentleman has rallied his both political and military base in the international community to help resist this naked aggression that, if left unchecked, really will do very bad things for security across Europe and across the globe, was truly inspiring.
And I hope you all understand, as former president of the National Defense University, this is an elite institution in Washington that trains military leaders and next level leadership. Am I describing it pretty accurately?
And if I may build upon that, not only U.S. military officers who are in the mid to senior ranks, but also U.S. officials from across every federal agency, right? Pick your favorite 3 letters. They have a student there. FBI, DHS, DEA. And in addition to those about 700 students that are U.S. citizens, we also bring in about 150 partner nation students every single year. So the last year I was there, we had 150 students from 80 different countries around the world. You want to talk about building relationships and building networks that will last for a very long time. Shared adversity does that, right? Yeah. So when you put people together in difficult times, they're going to come together, and that's going to build strong relationships and strong friendships. So they spend a year together doing this very difficult, compressed master's degree program in national security, and then they're friends for the rest of their careers and lives. So in addition to just the education that is a primary outcome of the National Defense University, it's also that relationship building that is so important. And then they also take private sector fellows. So unique amongst the war colleges of the United States military, the National Defense University has congressional approval and authority to admit up to 35 private sector students every single year, and they really bring a focus on how industry and defense intersect. So an unpaid announcement for the National Defense University.
I kind of see our global summit as also a similar think tank of that caliber. You can take this from being a number 2 perspective or any way you want, but what kind of crossroads have you faced, and how did you decide which path to take, and, the high of your career and any disappointments you want to share?
Sure. How many of you have ever failed at something? How many of you failed more than once? Yeah. I think we're all in that category. Yeah. So I would tell you that perseverance pays, and it matters, especially when you have a dream or a goal. We had a great speaker a couple of years ago who was the former CEO, the former president of a very large defense firm. And what she said to our student body is really insightful. She said, when you're young, you view the path to success as a straight line. Mm-hmm. Here I am. That's where I want to be. Let's go.
Right.
Does it work that way?
No, not at all. A lot of zigs, a lot of zags.
Exactly right. Life takes these turns along the way. And what you do when you encounter those changes is really important. I know I want to go this way. Maybe right now I'm over here, but I'll correct course back in this direction. So when I was graduating from high school here in South Miami, I went to Miami Southridge Senior High School. I applied to 2 colleges, the University of Miami and the United States Air Force Academy. And I only got into one of them. And it wasn't the Air Force Academy. So as I was trying to figure out how to pay for the other half of the tuition for my half scholarship to UM, I get a letter from the Air Force Academy Preparatory School that says, every year we take about 250 students, and most of them who graduate get into the academy. Are you interested? Sign me up. Yeah. So that failure to get into the academy on my first try was not final. I had a second bite at the apple. I decided to major in astronautical engineering. The short term for that is rocket science. Turns out it's hard. Who knew? They make you take the electrical engineering honors course to even try to get close to the rocket science course, and I was failing that with an F, wow. Literally at midterm. So I go to my academic advisor and I say, hey, sir, I still want to be an astronautical engineering major. Can I just drop down to the core electrical engineering course? And he said, no, it's a prerequisite for this major. Isn't there somebody we can talk to? Well, the department head sets the prerequisites for the course. Great, let's go talk to him. So the major was not terribly excited about making an appointment for the cadet to go see the colonel, but he did. So a couple of days later, I walk up to the top floor, knock on Colonel Robert Giffin's door. Sir, Cadet Plain reports. Yeah, what do you want, Plain? I lay it out for him very briefly. I still want to be an astro major. I just need to drop down to the basic EE course. And he looks over his glasses at me and he says, sure, we've had plenty of people do that. Get out of here. Thank you, sir. And I learned a very important lesson at a very young age, which was, do you want to take no from someone who can't say yes?
Oh.
So that academic advisor couldn't say yes to my request, but he sure wanted me to take no for an answer and just get out of his hair. So the third failure I'll share with you, because those two were both recoverable, this one was not. Second Lieutenant Mike Plain, brand new, shiny butter bars on my shoulders, get my first choice of pilot training base, first choice of start time, get to use all of my graduation leave, sign into the base, start training. Struggled for the first 6 months, but got through that. Then we switched into a different airplane, which was much more difficult to fly. And 4 months later, I find myself meeting a flying evaluation board. And the very first piece of paper in my official record in the United States Air Force is a training report that says, eliminated from pilot training for flying deficiency. I am here to tell you that failure is final. So, Second Lieutenant Plain, you have failed at the very first thing you have tried to do as an officer in our United States Air Force. What would you like to try to do next? I don't know. What can I do? I kind of like this flying thing. Would you be interested in navigator school? Sounds good. Sign me up. So off I go to navigator school. Turns out almost a year of pilot training was very good preparation for a year of navigator school. I did much better at that. Got my first choice of assignment to AC-130 gunships in Air Force Special Operations at Hurlburt Field, and the story goes from there. So what you do when you encounter failure is important. And going back to that quote from that senior defense CEO, life is going to take these turns along the way. What are you going to do when you encounter a big one? More importantly, as a leader, what are you going to do to help your people who encounter those same kinds of challenges and failures? Can you help them get around it? Can you help them get over it? Or can you help them realize you need to take a slightly different path at this point? You may still get there where you want to go, but this straight line here just turned.
Leadership 101, advocate for yourself and always find the yes person. There you go.
The person who can say yes.
Yes. Let's move on to national security. Given the strategic importance of U.S.-LATAM's relationship in the broader context of global security, can you share a few factors that the U.S. considers in meeting national security challenges in the region while remaining competitive, and especially in light of the Chinese influence?
You don't ask easy questions, do you? Must be why she's an Emmy Award-winning journalist.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. So there's always the primacy of national security. And nations do what is in their interest, period. And if you wind back the way back clock to Thucydides, nations go to war for fear, honor, or interest. So understanding the U.S. national interest in the first place of why we want to engage in the Caribbean and Latin America and why regional security is important and good for U.S. national security is step one. People need to come to that realization. And I don't think necessarily that we as a nation realize that. We're so focused on other security challenges in other parts of the world that we don't always clearly see that there are security challenges right here in our own neighborhood in the Western Hemisphere. So U.S. national security, look through that lens first. Okay. The second lens to look through is your partner's national security. What are their interests? And then where do those two things intersect? Because that's an area that you can work together on. So many of the areas that we worked in U.S. Southern Command with partner nations dealt with security assistance. You may be familiar with the term foreign military sales. That's other countries buying U.S. military equipment manufactured by U.S. defense companies. And there's a whole process for that. And we help partner nations realize what that is, have a discussion about what are your needs. Do you need to better see what's going on in and around your country? Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Do you need the ability to get out 100 miles at sea to interdict drug runners who are trying to go around your country and try to put in really isolated places so that they can run their product? What is that national security need that you're trying to solve? And then we work together to try to do that. And then certainly another big area where U.S. Southern Command has a tremendous amount of influence is in humanitarian assistance and disaster response. Every form of natural disaster known to humankind occurs in the Caribbean and Latin America. Floods, wildfires, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, they happen every single year. And the capability and capacity of countries to deal with that in the region varies widely. Some are incredibly capable and really don't ask for any help whatsoever. But it also depends on the magnitude of the event, right? There are some events that just would overwhelm almost any country's resources. So I think I'll pause there.
Okay.
And
well, I want to drill down because I like stories. So considering the diversity of these security challenges in Latin America, how do you tailor the security assistance to meet the unique needs? You mentioned this a little bit, meeting the needs of the other person, the other countries. Give me an example of something that we can all relate to here.
Sure. So inside of every U.S. embassy, in every country where the United States has a diplomatic presence, there is 99% of the time a security cooperation office that has U.S. military officers from all services assigned into that security cooperation office on what we call the country team. So the ambassador or chief of mission is the head of everything that the United States does in that country. The country team works for that chief of mission, and it's DOD, the Department of Defense, it is state, it is commerce, it's every element of U.S. national power. So the country team goes and has the discussion with their counterparts, whether it's the chief of defense, whether it's the minister of foreign affairs or the interior ministry. And together they define what the issue set is that they think the United States may be able to help with if the country wants U.S. help with that. So a particular example, and this happened during COVID, was there is a small patrol vessel that the United States was producing that's very good for getting offshore and helping to interdict illegal narcotics trafficking. And several of the countries had ordered some of these boats. And in particular, the very first one of these off the line was due to be delivered in the spring of 2020. And of course, COVID starts locking everything down in the region in February and March. And in fact, I was in Colombia, up in La Guajira Peninsula in March, the middle of March 2020. So when I returned back through Miami International, I got to go straight to my house and stay there for 14 days and isolate. But this was the environment, and now we're supposed to deliver these really important naval interdiction capabilities to our partners. And how do you do that during COVID, where everybody is starting to back away, go virtual, and you've got a physical piece of equipment you've got to deliver? So we were able to do that working both with the Navy International Program Office and with the manufacturer and with the partner nation. And we delivered that vessel in July. And then the contractor had to set up the training as well, face-to-face, in-person training in the middle of COVID. I'll give you two more examples. One of them is an expanded counter-narcotics mission that U.S. Southern Command received on the 1st of April, 2020. In the first Trump administration, the president said, I want you to do more of this, less than a month into COVID. So he sent additional U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Navy vessels and helicopters and boats into the region, and we did that for a solid year. The second event, which kind of brings a couple of streams together, was hurricane response, November of 2020. Hurricane Eta comes sweeping across Central America, across Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama. And then 2 weeks later, this was a Category 4 hurricane. 2 weeks later, Hurricane Iota, also a Category 4 hurricane, makes landfall 15 miles away from where the first one did. You want to talk about a mess. So U.S. Southern Command has a task force, the Joint Task Force Bravo, which is headquartered in Honduras. So it's in the region. They have helicopters, they have personnel, and they scrambled to help. And there is a wonderful video, and I'm sorry that I don't have it here to show you all, but a U.S. Black Hawk helicopter goes into El Salvador. In the middle of this raging river, there's a tiny little island that has been cut off. And there are some Salvadoran nationals who are on the far bank of the river. They're safe. And they're filming this with their cell phone camera. This Black Hawk helicopter lands its front wheels on this island. The river is raging all around. One of the crew members hops off. You see the downdraft of the wind from the helicopter blades, and he makes his way through that, grabs 3 people out of what is now just a pile of sticks that used to be a hut on this island, gets them onto the helicopter. Helicopter takes off and brings them to safety. And on the video, people are clapping and cheering. And that's what we do.
Is that trained for, or is that impromptu in those situations, like that move right there?
Yeah, I think you rely on your training and then making a risk assessment of, is this something that I'm capable of doing, that we're capable of doing? There's definitely risk, but those are extremely well-trained crew members, and they did a great job.
But is that an order from above, or is that the pilot making some of those decisions?
That was the pilot making the decision.
Okay.
He was on the spot. He said, those people need help. We're going to help them.
Bravo.
Amen.
Clearly, there are many wins. In your experience, what security assistance programs did you find really help strengthen the military and our law enforcement capabilities as it relates to Latin America?
So the military piece I can clearly talk to. Law enforcement training is actually the purview of the U.S. State Department. Okay. So the Bureau of International Narcotics in Law Enforcement, state INL, is responsible for, they're the lead U.S. federal agent for law enforcement training. But they often come to the military as well and say, hey, we've got a particular area that we think you're well suited to help us with this training. So we do a lot of that as well in conjunction with the State Department. And I would tell you some of the most useful and helpful security assistance and security cooperation programs we have are the training events, where you're directly interacting with your partners. Out in the field, you're seeing their problems, you're seeing their capabilities. You're not just coming in and saying, well, this is how the United States does it, you ought to do it this way. That is a horrible way to start a conversation, ladies and gentlemen. Look and listen first, and then decide, hey, here are some areas that I think we can work together on. But I say that's the most important because, much like the National Defense University comment I made, it's building those relationships. And we have relationships that go back 5, 10, 20 plus years in the region. And as our officers grow in rank and responsibility, so too do theirs. And oftentimes they've worked together when they were more junior officers. And imagine how much easier that makes the conversations 10 or 20 years down the line when you're a colonel and they're a colonel, or you're a general and they're an admiral. It makes a difference.
I know you love leadership. And that example, I want you to kind of parlay that into the office worker, because you have the interns maybe coming up, and then they get the jobs, and then they become managers. What kind of advice can you give those, not in the military, but in the business world or other sectors, about relationship building for future greater good for the organization?
Don't burn a bridge unless it's absolutely necessary. Somebody may be on the other side of that bridge that you need later. Mm-hmm. So if you get mad, swallow it. Right? Particularly as a higher level leader, your workforce is looking for predictability and consistency. And if they're not sure which boss or which face of the boss they're going to see that day, they're going to be hesitant to come to you. And one of the hardest things to do as you rise higher in an organization is hear about what's going on inside of the organization. So you have to get out. You have to talk to people. Talk to the interns. Talk to the new hires. Talk to the people who have been there for a while. If all you do is sit behind your desk, you will fail. You have to get out. You have to interact with your people. Because you've got to get them interested and committed to what you're doing. This is why we all have vision statements and mission statements. And when I arrived at the National Defense University, I created 3 lines of effort, because that's a military thing, right? You have lines of objective, you have lines of effort. I said, these are the 3 lines that we're going to focus our energy on. Number 1, enable student, alumni, and stakeholder success. That was our reason for being. If we're not enabling the student success in particular, stop. Mm-hmm. So everything you're doing ought to contribute to that first line of effort. The second line of effort was to improve our university. And the third line of effort was to develop our team. It was an investment in ourselves, in our faculty, in our staff. You can drive a truck through those 3 statements. They are intentionally very broad. But if you can't align whatever it is that you do into those lines of effort, stop doing that and do something that is. So how do you create that vision? How do you create that sense of commitment to what it is that you're doing and you're trying to accomplish? For the young folks in the audience here who are really just getting started on what are going to be very enriching and successful careers, I would share a key to success, a recipe for success that a friend of mine gave at a talk several years back. And he said he got this from his grandmother, so I got to take him at his word here. Okay. She said, dream big, work hard, don't quit.
I think my grandma said that too.
And you're an Emmy Award-winning journalist.
Thank you for breaking that down for the civilian population. In my line of work, the danger, the natural disaster, the old saying, sometimes if it bleeds, it leads, sadly, is what we do in television news. On the other side of that, so many of these natural disasters, I don't know if it's happening more often or the news cycle is just so ubiquitous that we're hearing about it constantly. So in terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster response, you frequently handle all of these issues, earthquakes, hurricanes. What lessons have you learned over the years that can be applied to future humanitarian crisis?
Don't go it alone. So in the days leading up to Hurricane Matthew in 2016, we knew this hurricane was going to hit in the Caribbean. It started out driving west across the Atlantic, just north of the northern coast of South America, right? So it looks like it's headed, towards Venezuela and Colombia. But the weather forecasters said it's gonna turn north. Wait for it, it's gonna turn north. And sure enough, it took a 90-degree turn north. And now it's heading for Grand Cayman, Jamaica, and Haiti. And another day goes by and it's clear that Haiti is in the crosshairs of Hurricane Matthew. So my boss said, I want to talk to the U.S. ambassador in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And I also want to talk to the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, who has used to be called the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, now the Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs, that is the U.S. lead federal agent for supplying humanitarian assistance to foreign nations. Said, I want to talk to all three of them. Yes, sir. So we reached out to them. They all agreed. We set up a phone call, and this is now the day prior to landfall of the hurricane in Haiti. And they all went through, here's what we think is going to happen. The U.S. ambassador said, I will immediately contact the government of Haiti and ask them if they want to declare an emergency and ask for U.S. assistance, because that unlocks both money and authority that the chief of mission, the U.S. ambassador, has. Great. So the ambassador's got that. The Southern Command commander said, I have helicopters that I am going to pre-position. So after the hurricane rolls through the next few hours, we'll get those helicopters on the ground in Port-au-Prince, because that's exactly where the hurricane was headed. And then the USAID administrator says, I will already have a disaster assistance response team on the ground in Port-au-Prince. And in fact, they were already there. They were there before the hurricane. So they rode out this monster hurricane in Port-au-Prince to then start the interaction with what would be Haiti's FEMA equivalent, Federal Emergency Management Agency. If any one of those three individuals or three agencies had just tried to do it themselves, they would have failed miserably. So don't go it alone. Remember that network that you're building? Mm-hmm. Call your friends. The commander had met the U.S. ambassador in Haiti several times before. They already knew each other. He had met the USAID administrator. They knew each other. Don't go it alone. Understand the problem, right? Don't try to make it what you want it to be. Understand the problem, and then spend your energy trying to bring your resources to solving what you can.
How can the U.S. continue to build the trust and credibility with Latin America nations, and especially when it comes to security assistance and humanitarian efforts? I mean, is it where it needs to be? Because obviously it's the network that brings along the success long term. Any suggestion on what you would like to see done differently, better? What's in the pipeline for change?
I think there is much more that can be done. And one of the more insidious influences in the Caribbean and Latin America is the activities of the People's Republic of China. So what are they doing in such a big way in Latin America and the Caribbean? One is very easy to identify. There's an economic interest there, right? I mean, People's Republic of China is the number one trading partner for many of our neighbors in the region, for many of our partners. That is an absolutely valid reason for the People's Republic of China to be engaged in the region. Then you look at their Belt and Road Initiative, which didn't start in Latin America and the Caribbean until 2017. Panama was the first country to sign up to that. And when I left U.S. Southern Command in 2021, 19 of the 31 nations in the region were signatories to the Belt and Road Initiative. And on its surface, it appears to be a worthwhile program, right? Countries have infrastructure needs. PRC is willing to provide money and resources, not for free, usually at a loan, sometimes at competitive interest rates, sometimes not, to help them with that project. And oftentimes they do bring in PRC workers in the project as well. So what's best for our partners in the region is for them to get foreign direct investment in their country with their own people working on those programs, right? Because the trickle-down effect of all of that money inside of their country is really going to help raise their economy. But these Belt and Road Initiative deals are not very transparent. We don't know the details of it. Oftentimes, the population of the country doesn't know what political deal has been struck under the table.
Can I take you back?
Yes.
PRC, People's Republic of China, Belt and Road Initiative, sometimes considered the Silk Road, and it's building infrastructure around Asia, Africa, and what am I missing? Europe.
Latin America.
Latin America. The point is to find natural resources, right? And to kind of, like, explain a little bit about the move on this initiative and why it could be good and what the dangers are.
Yeah, so I think the Belt and Road Initiative really is about generating influence, PRC, People's Republic of China influence, in whatever region or country they have a program or project. And then the question is, what do they want to do with that influence? And what I would tell you is they want a particular political outcome that recognizes the People's Republic of China's goals and initiatives, sometimes on the opposite end of the spectrum of what the United States is looking for, right? So the United States is keenly interested in a stable, prosperous Western Hemisphere. We all live here together. People's Republic of China doesn't live here. They are focused on the economics. They are focused on the natural resources and the resource extraction. And for those of you who are students of foreign policy and diplomacy, you know that the United States has a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. U.S. companies cannot pay a bribe or a kickback to anybody in another country or even in our own country, or they're breaking U.S. law. Mm-hmm. There is no similar law in the People's Republic of China, which goes back to how transparent are these deals? You know, here's money to do, that dam, build that dam or build that road. I don't need any receipts. What's going on?
Clearly, what you gave us today is a lifelong learning lesson. So thank you very much, General. Thank you. Thank you.